Erev Tov Rabotai, we are continuing with our Mishna Yomi Masechet Chagigah. We are up to Perek Aleph Mishnah Chet. Today's Mishnayot should be Le'ilui Nishmat Neria ben Svetlana Aranbayev and Eliyahu ben Mordechai Israelov Menuchatam beGan Eden Amen and Le'avdi ben Chaim L'Chaim v'Refuah Shenamav Daniel Shalom ben Rosa Betoch Shar Cholei Israel. When Moshe received the Torah at Har Sinai, only the 10 commandments were written down. Later, when God commanded him to write the Torah on a scroll, only part of the law revealed to him was written. The rest remained an oral tradition. This included entire laws, as well as the numerous details of even those laws written in the Torah. Only in later generations, when it became evident that the oral tradition was starting to be forgotten, did the sages of those times permit writing down the oral Torah. This became the Mishnah and the Talmud. Besides those laws that are written clearly in the Torah and those that are known only through the oral tradition, there is yet another category of laws. Those that are hinted at in the Torah, but so vaguely that were it not for the oral traditions about them, we would know little, if anything, of their essence. The following are examples of this last category. Now, this Mishnah appears here because one of the mitzvot it discusses is the Chagigah offering. The laws governing the release of vows by an outstanding sage or a court of 3 laymen float in the air. They have no firm basis in the written Torah to support them. The scriptural reference to them is vague, and were it not for the oral tradition, they would not be known. Now, a single expert or a court of 3 laymen may release a person from his vow if they can determine a circumstance that results from his vow, which, had it been considered by the person, would have prevented him from originally making the vow. The scriptural allusion to this law is based on that which the Torah states, Lo yechel dvaro, he shall not profane his word, as it says in Bamidbar, chapter 30, verse 3. The sages deduce that although he may not profane his word, others may profane his word by annulling the vow. And the Mishnah considers this a vague reference because the law is not stated clearly in the verse. Rather, it is known only by a deduction from that which is not said in the verse. Therefore, it is only through the oral tradition that the law and its scriptural allusion are known. Now, the following laws have a firmer basis in the written Torah. However, many of their key laws are known to us only through the oral tradition. Hilchot Shabbat, Chagigot, v'Me'ilot. The laws of Shabbat, the obligation to bring Chagigah offerings. Let us deal now with the laws of Shabbat. Although the prohibition to do melacha work on Shabbat is stated explicitly in the Torah, in Sefer Shemot, chapter 20, verse 10, the rule that one is liable only for melechet machshevet, purposeful labor, is not. The Mishnah refers to this principle of purposeful labor, of which there are numerous rules. One of these rules is that the intended purpose of the work should be that purpose which the melacha forbids. For example, digging a hole in the house in Shabbat is prohibited because it is considered the melacha of building. If the intended purpose of the digger is to make a useful hole, he has constructed something and his work is considered a purposeful melacha of building. However, if he digs the hole only for the purpose of using the earth removed from the ground, but he has no use for the hole itself, his digging is not purposeful as building, and he has therefore not biblically transgressed the melacha of building. Now, the term melechet machshevet, purposeful labor, is not written in the Torah regarding Shabbat, but rather regarding the construction of the Mishkan, of the tabernacle. Its application to the laws of Shabbat is derived from the fact that the passages that discuss Shabbat and the construction of the tabernacle are placed next to each other in Shemot chapter 35. The Mishnah deems this a weak scriptural source, and if not for the oral law, it would not be known that this concept applies to Shabbat at all. Chagigot, the obligation to bring Chagigah offerings, the requirement to bring a Chagigah offering on the festivals is derived from the verse, V'chagotem oto chag l'Adonai, and you shall celebrate it as a festival for Hashem, as it brought down in Sefer Shemot, chapter 12, verse 14. However, the verse does not explicitly state that one must bring a Chagigah offering. Rather, it states only that one must rejoice on the festivals. That the verse also refers to the requirement of bringing the offering is deduced only from similar terminology used in a verse in the prophets that discusses bringing offerings. Since Torah laws cannot be derived from the words of the prophets, Moshe was the only lawgiver, this is not considered an actual source, merely an allusion to a law known from somewhere else, from elsewhere, as the Gemara Masechet Chagigah writes on page 10b. V'me'ilot, and the obligation to bring mi'ilah offerings, which are brought when consecrated objects are mistakenly used for secular purposes. The law of mi'ilah states that when a person uses a consecrated item while unaware of its status for a secular purpose, he is obligated to bring an asham offering. This is written explicitly in the Torah. However, there is a rule concerning mi'ilah performed to an agent that is not written in the Torah. If someone appoints an agent to do something for him with the consecrated item, and neither the sender nor the agent was aware of its consecrated status at that time, when the item is then used, it is the sender who is liable. However, if after sending the agent, the sender realizes the item is consecrated and may not be used, and the agent does not, then when the item is used, it is the agent who is liable. In this situation, the sender is not liable, since at the time the item is used, he is aware of the true status of the item, and it is assumed that he no longer wishes the agent to use it. The agent, however, is liable since he indeed used the item while remaining unaware of its status. This rule is considered chidush, a novel, because had the sender not realized the true status of the item, he would have been liable and not the agent. His realization affects the agent's liability. Since there is no obvious scriptural derivation for this rule, it must be learned from the oral law, as the Gemara says on page 10b in Masechet Chagigah. Harehem kararim ateluin b'sara. These are like mountains suspended by a hair. She'en mikra mu'at v'alachot merubot, for they have few scriptural references supporting them, yet they have numerous laws. These mitzvot have numerous laws detailed in the oral Torah that are suspended from vague scriptural sources, like mountains suspended from a human hair. Now, the following laws are facets of general precepts. The general precepts are written clearly in the Torah, but these facets are not. However, they have clear scriptural references that the laws mentioned earlier in the Mishnah, since they are either derived by one of the 13 methods to which laws of the Torah are derived, which are considered clear scriptural references, or because they can be understood from the verses that discuss the general precepts. Hadinin, monetary laws. As an example, the Mishnah refers to the case of two men fighting who in the course of their struggle end up striking a woman and killing her. In the view of one Tana, the murderer is obligated to pay the heiress her value as a maidservant. However, he is not liable for the death penalty since he did not intend to kill her. This law comes from an interpretation of the verse, V'natata nefesh tachat nefesh, and you shall give the value of a soul for a soul. Although not stated explicitly in the Torah, this law is considered to have a clear source, because it is derived by Gzerah Shavah, which is one of the 13 methods by which Torah laws are derived, V'ha'avodot, and the laws of sacrificial services. This refers to carrying the blood of slaughtered offerings to the altar to be sprinkled. Although this step is potentially dispensable in a case where one slaughtered an offering next to the altar, where he did actually carry the blood to the altar, his carrying is considered a fundamental part of the service and is subject to all the stringencies of the other parts of the service. This is derived from the fact that Torah uses the term vikrivu, and they shall draw near, to describe the process of catching the blood in a temple vessel. The usage of this term, which normally refers to carrying, indicates that carrying the blood, like receiving it, is considered a temple service. Since this law is derived from Hekesh, which is one of the 13 methods, it is considered to have a clear source. The Hataharot, Vatumot, the laws of purity and Tuma, contamination. This refers to the minimum amount of water required for a mikveh, 40 se'ah. The Gemara on page 11a derives this from the verse, V'achatz b'mayim et kol b'saro, he shall immerse his entire flesh in the water. Although the simple meaning of the verse is the requirement to immerse in a mikveh, the Gemara also deduces from it that the mikveh must be large enough for one's entire body to be immersed at once. The sages determined the size to be 40 se'ah. This law is inferred from the verse discussing the mikveh itself, hence it is considered to have a clear source, and the laws of tumah, contamination. As an example, the Mishnah refers to the minimum amount of the carcass of certain rodents and reptiles that transmit tumah. This amount is derived from two verses that discuss the laws of tumah, contamination. One verse implies that tumah is imparted only by a complete carcass, whereas the other verse indicates that even a portion of a carcass is sufficient to impart tumah. The sages derive from the two verses that a portion of a carcass can indeed impart tumah, but only if its size is equivalent to the smallest size whole rodent mentioned in Scripture, which is the size of a lentil. This law as well is considered to have a strong scriptural reference, since it is understood from the verses that discuss tumah. V'arayot, and the laws of forbidden relationships. In Sefer Vayikra chapter 18, the Torah clearly delineates which relationships are forbidden. The Mishnah refers to the prohibition to cohabit with one's daughter born out of wedlock, which is not explicitly stated but is derived from Gezerah Shava. It is considered to have a clear source. They have scriptural support. Both these mitzvot that have a vague scriptural sources and mitzvot that are like mountains suspended by a hair, and those mitzvot that have clear scriptural sources are fundamentals of the Torah. All of these laws are a fundamental part of the Torah, even though they are not written in the Torah explicitly. And that is end of chapter 1, Mishnah 8. We continue now with chapter 2, Mishnah 1. The last chapter concluded by saying that some forbidden relationships were inferred by the sages from the Torah. This Mishnah limits how the laws of these forbidden relationships may be taught. And Doshin Barayot Bishlosha, we may not teach about these forbidden marital relationships to 3 or more students at one time, because in a group of that size, some students might not pay attention to the lesson, and then out of ignorance, they may rule leniently. When there are 3 or more students and the teacher discusses something with one of them, the other 2 might talk with each other and not pay attention to the lesson. Since human desire plays a strong role in the matter of forbidden marital relationships, the students who did not listen might then rule leniently in the cases that they missed. Therefore, to ensure that these laws are clearly known, the sages forbade teaching them to a group of 3 or more. When only 2 students are present, this concern does not apply. For even if the teacher should discuss something with just one of them, the other one will listen, since there is no one else for him to talk to, as the Gemara explains on page 11b in Masechet Chagigah. The Mishnah does not refer to the forbidden relationships that are mentioned clearly in the Torah. For example, one's mother and sister, since these are well known, there is little danger of misunderstanding. Rather, the Rav explains it refers only to those that are not mentioned clearly in the Torah, but were inferred by the sages using the methods of scriptural derivation. For example, the mother of one's father-in-law. The Mishnah continues with other laws of this type, and we may not teach about Maaseh Bereshit, the account of creation, to 2 or more people at one time. Now, the story of the 6 days of creation is what we're referring to. Here, too, the prohibition does not relate to the simple meanings of the verses, but to their deeper meanings. This subject contains wisdom that should be kept hidden, such as the Kabbalistic secrets that describe how Hashem created the world, and as such, it may be passed only from individual to individual and not be taught publicly. We may not teach about Maaseh Merkavah, the account of the chariot, the vision of heaven experienced by the prophet Ezekiel in Cheskel chapter 1 and the prophet Yeshaya in chapter 6. It is called the account of the chariot because it describes angelic beings bearing the throne of Hashem like horses, drawing a chariot, as explained by the Moed Nevuchim, the Rambam. The Mishnah says we may not teach about this to even one person, unless he is a scholar who can understand it on his own, meaning he can infer the lessons from just a general outline. Maaseh Merkavah is of an even more secret nature than Maaseh Bereshit, for it contains elaborate descriptions of the angels and the heavens, so it may not be taught to anyone in detail. One may give only a general outline to a scholar who is perceptive enough to infer the details on his own. These subjects contain hidden wisdom of the Torah, so they may be taught only in a limited matter. Maaseh Bereshit and Maaseh Merkavah. The Mishnah warns that some subjects should not be studied at all. Anyone who examines the following 4 matters would be better off had he not been born. What is above the heavens? What is below the world? What existed before the world was created? And what will exist after the end of the world? Since the human mind is incapable of fully understanding these concepts, investigating them may well lead to heresy. These are spiritual concepts that the physical human mind cannot grasp, just as a blind man cannot fully understand light. When a person thinks about them, he might conclude that since he cannot comprehend these matters, his faith must be mistaken, God forbid. It would then be better had he not been born, because the person is better off not having been born than chas v'shalom being a heretic. And a similar warning, and anyone who is not concerned about the honor of his creator would be better off not having been born. This refers to a person who sins in a place where no one will see him, but ignores the fact that Hashem sees everything. And that is the Rabotai of today's Mishna Yomi. Baruch Adonai La'olam. Amen v'amen.